Great to have you there with us on this Thursday morning. 131873 is the number. Well, obviously Australia is becoming more and more integrated and ingrained with China on issues of trade. There's no doubt about it. Globalisation is playing its role there. But there's been problem after problem coming to people's attention. Building, cladding, food products, asbestos-riddled components. We spoke about that the other week in the building industry. Everywhere you turn, it seems that there are problems with a significant chunk of product coming from China. And now we learn Australian lives may well be at risk because of another issue, shoddy fabricated steel, again imported largely from China. Well, the nation's peak welding body, the Welding Technology Institute of Australia, reckon that about 85% of imported fabricated steel coming into the country failed to meet our own standards. The chief executive is Crittenden. He joins me on the line to discuss it. Greg, thanks for being there this morning.
Good morning, Michael. It's a pleasure to be with you.
What is the basic issue here? The standards in a country like China simply don't match our own. Is that the story?
That's basically the problem. We have very high standards here in Australia, but there's no requirement for any imported fabricated steel to meet those standards. And what we're finding in areas from oil and gas industry to bridges to grain silos is that they don't meet our standards, and our welding inspectors are saying that many of these fabricated pieces of steel are not safe.
Describe for the layman out there, if you could, Geoff, the difference between just a piece of steel and this notion of prefabricated steel.
Well, a piece of steel is something that comes out of a steel mill, Michael, and it's fabricated when we value add to it. So we cut it up, we weld it, and we put it all together.
Okay, so we're talking about stuff that might be considered components of larger building works, really, here, as you say.
That's right.
Now, it comes in from China. It's been ordered by Australia. One would assume there would be governmental checks and balances somewhere along the line to check that the paperwork in China is truthful and it matches the standards here, but is there?
There's absolutely no regulation which protects the Australian public from shoddy imported fabricated steel.
Nothing? Nothing. So is what you're saying, a company here who's building a bridge or something, they can put in their order, the Chinese are the most competitive because they're financially they're the cheapest and they can do it the quickest. They sign off and that's it. No one checks whether it meets Australian standards if it were to be made and manufactured here.
They often do check, but there's no requirement for them to do so. And if it doesn't meet the standard, there's no requirement for them to rectify it.
Well,
can I give you an example, Mike?
Please do.
There was a bridge which was not actually fabricated in China. It was fabricated in Vietnam. It was a road bridge which was procured by a Sydney council. They put the bridge in place. It was the cheapest bid. The local Australian fabricator was almost twice as expensive. When they got the bridge in place, they started to get concerned as traffic went over it that the deflection, the amount of bend in the bridge was far greater than the design. So they inspected it, decided that the bridge was unsafe and took it down. They replaced it with an Australian-built bridge. When they cut the bridge up, they found that the steel wasn't of the correct standard. And what had happened is the main supporting trusses had been filled with water so that the weight felt the same. Now, this is the issue that we're having around the country. There's a worse issue. There's a bridge in Western Australia which runs between a primary school and a secondary school over a water course.
Yeah, I think I saw this mentioned on the ABC earlier this year.
We inspected that bridge, and it is totally unsafe, but nobody seems to be interested. There's no regulation that makes people interested in the safety of those children.
I mean, you make the point, and I read about this in the Oz yesterday, you made the point that lives are at risk. There's ticking time bombs, but as you're saying, it seems there's very little effort to address it.
There is a big issue. Federal governments have now, over many years, tried to reduce regulation, I guess, in favour of business. But it's gone too far. We need to have sensible regulation that means that it protects people. That's the whole point of having Australian standards. They're there to protect people.
Yep.
And it's no good unless you have the regulation to enforce them.
All right, well, you're seeking a meeting with the new Industry Minister, Greg Hunt. How's that progressing?
It's been excellent. Thank you, Michael. His staff have been on the phone this afternoon asking for a meeting, so I'm very pleased.
And as far as the crossbenchers are concerned, you're getting interest in the Senate, I understand.
We've had a lot of support, particularly from Senator Xenophon, but also from Senator Carr. They're both very passionate about this, and I'm sure we'll get support from the crossbenchers when we get to that point.
Obviously, I think looking at the numbers, about 600,000 tonnes of fabricated steel comes in about every year. The vast bulk, 500,000 tonne of that, is from China. You have concerns, of course, with some of the Chinese product, but is it broader than just China? You mentioned Vietnam earlier. Yes,
it is broader than just China, but most of the issues seem to be with Chinese-based steel. I have to say though, this isn't an anti-China campaign we're running here. If product that comes in meets Australian standards and is safe, we don't have an argument whether it comes from China, Malaysia, Vietnam, or anywhere. But it has to be safe and it has to meet our standards.
I mean, broadly speaking, though, this does tie into a wider debate. The steel industry in Australia has been in the news, certainly leading up to the election, for, in some respects, all the wrong reasons, because of its lack of financial strength. I suppose if there is inferior product coming in, it's largely coming in because people are ordering it because it's financially undercutting the locally made stuff. But just like I said with representatives from the asbestos industry the other day, you get what you pay for, don't you?
That's exactly right. And the Australian steel is all accredited under the Australian certification scheme. And exactly, you know what you're getting for. You know it's safe. And there are some issues when welding steel. I don't want to get too complicated here, but if the composition isn't correct, it can create safety issues once it's welded down the track. So you have to know exactly the chemistry of the steel that you're buying, and you don't always know that with imported steel. Quite often, the material data sheets, the things that tell you what the recipe is, have been falsified. They're not true at all.
All right, well then let's wrap it up with what needs to be done. We've identified the problem here. You're pushing for a two-tiered system to enforce compliance. It seems a lack of compliance and a lack of oversight is the issue. Is that right?
That's exactly what we're asking for. We're asking for regulation that enforces compliance to Australian standards. And we've made an offer to the federal government to run the scheme, so there's no cost to the Australian public. We will run the scheme, and we will ensure compliance so that we know that everything that's erected in Australia is safe.
All right, we'll probably catch up down the track and see how the progress of all this is going. A lot of people interested in this. Geoff, thanks so much for joining us on the show this morning.
Thank you very much indeed, Michael. Have a good day.
You too. That's my pleasure. Geoff Crittenden there, the CEO of Welding Technology Institute of Australia.